January 23, 1973. Golden Harvest Studios, Hammer Hill Road, Kowloon, 6:41 in the morning. A man named Lam Chun-wai picked up his bag, walked across the soundstage floor without saying anything to anyone, pushed open the heavy exterior door that led to the loading area behind Stage 3, and did not come back. He had been on set for one day out of what was supposed to be a 12-week engagement, a stunt role in the first major Hollywood-Hong Kong co-production in the history of either industry, the kind of work that circulated through the stunt community in whispers before it was confirmed, the kind of job that men with his specific background waited years to get. Warner Brothers money, an international cast, Bruce Lee as the center of everything. The Enter the Dragon shoot had begun 3 weeks earlier, and the crew had settled into the particular exhausted rhythm of a large production moving fast through material that was technically demanding. Lam Chun-wai had arrived on day 22. He left on day 22, and the reason he gave, in the single conversation that anyone on that production documented, was not what anyone expected him to say. I need to tell you something about how I found this story, because the way I found it matters for understanding what it actually is. The Enter the Dragon production records are more complete than most Hong Kong films of this era, partly because of Warner Bros.' involvement, and partly because the shoot attracted a level of documentation, journalists, photographers, industry observers, that a domestic Hong Kong production would not have generated. There are accounts of the shoot from multiple perspectives: American crew, Hong Kong crew, cast members, people who visited the set. What there is almost nothing of, in any of this documentation, is the daily experience of the stunt performers who populated the background of every fight sequence in the film. They are present in the footage. They are almost entirely absent from the record. I came across the name Lam Chun-wai in a margin note in a production account from a Hong Kong crew member, a set decorator, who had been working at Golden Harvest since the early years of the studio's operation. The note was brief. It said that a stuntman had left after one day without completing his contract, and that Bruce Lee had spoken to him before he left, and that the conversation had apparently been significant enough that the set decorator, who had not been close enough to hear it, noted the fact of it specifically, the fact that it happened, not what was said. I want to be honest here, the better part of 3 weeks trying to find out what was said in that conversation. What I found was partial, contradictory in its details, and completely consistent in its emotional core. And the emotional core is what this story is actually about. Though you won't understand why until I've told you everything before it. The Enter the Dragon shoot was running from January through March of 1973. Golden Harvest Studios at Hammer Hill Road in Kowloon, concrete block construction, multiple sound stages packed with equipment, the perpetual controlled chaos of a large crew operating in a space that had not quite been designed for the scale of what it was now hosting. The American production apparatus that Warner Bros. Had sent was running alongside the Hong Kong crew in the specific friction of two different production cultures trying to occupy the same space and make the same film. Cantonese and English mixed on the floor constantly, sometimes mid-sentence, people finishing thoughts in whichever language had the right word available. The catering, dim sum carts in the morning, then a larger spread at the lunch break, was a point of visible cultural negotiation. The American producers ate from it with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The Hong Kong crew ate from it the way people eat food they have eaten every day of their working lives. Bruce Lee was at the center of all of it. 32 years old, 5'7", 135 pounds, and operating by January of 1973 at a level of intensity that the people who worked with him in this period described consistently and in terms that were specific rather than reverential. Not the language of myth, not the claims that grew in the years after his death until they detached from any actual person, a specific observational language of people who had been in the same room with him and were reporting what they saw. The word that appears most frequently across accounts from both the American and Hong Kong sides of the crew is focused, not in the generic sense. in the sense of a lens that has been adjusted until everything behind it is perfectly sharp, and the adjustment has cost something, and the cost is visible in the quality of the attention. He was not sleeping enough. This is documented. He was carrying the weight of a production that was, for him, not simply a film. It was the answer to a question that Hollywood had been refusing to hear for 15 years. Lam Chun-wai was 26 years old in January of 1973. He had come up through the stunt system that Hong Kong action cinema had built over the preceding decade, a system that was, by any objective assessment, one of the most demanding physical training environments in the world. Men who worked as stunt performers in Hong Kong cinema in this era had typically been training since childhood, often in the Peking opera tradition or in martial arts schools that had their own internal hierarchies and their own ways of producing people who could do things on camera that defied normal expectations of what a human body could manage. The work was dangerous in ways that the production system had not fully institutionalized safety procedures for: falls from heights, impact work, sequences that were designed to look uncontrolled and therefore could not be fully controlled. The stunt community operated on a combination of technical skill, physical courage, and a particular cultural understanding of what it meant to work in this industry. You showed up, you did what was required, you did not make the cost of it visible. Lam had been doing this for 4 years. He was good at it by the accounts of the people who had worked with him on other productions. Reliable, technically precise, not the most physically gifted performer in the community, but someone who compensated for that through preparation, who arrived knowing what the sequence required and having already worked out most of the variables before he was ever on set. He had prepared extensively for the Enter the Dragon work. The stunt coordinator had given him his sequences 3 weeks before the shoot began, and by every account I found, he had used those 3 weeks the way he always used preparation time, methodically, thoroughly, with the specific patience of someone who had learned that confidence in performance came from the work done before the camera was rolling. He knew what he was there to do. He arrived on day 22 knowing it, and this is where I have to tell you what I found, and be straight with you about what I don't know. The sequence Lam was assigned on his 1 day on set was a background fight, one of the tournament sequences, multiple stunt performers moving through choreography, while the principal cast worked the foreground. Standard stunt work for a production of this scale. The sequence had been rehearsed the day before his arrival. He was integrating into something that already had its rhythm established, which requires a specific kind of adaptability, and by every account the integration was technically fine. He hit his marks. The choreography worked. The morning's shooting moved forward without incident. Bruce Lee was on set for part of the morning's work. He was always on set. He watched everything, and the quality of his watching, the specific attention he brought to observing the people working around him, not just the principal performers but the entire working floor, was something the crew had become accustomed to, and something that newer arrivals consistently found unsettling until they understood what it was. It was not critical attention. It was not the watching of a man looking for problems. It was something closer to curiosity, the watching of someone who was genuinely interested in what each person on the floor actually was, what they were actually capable of, separate from what their role required them to demonstrate. He watched Lam Chun-wai work for approximately 2 hours on the morning of January 23rd. What he saw, and here is where the accounts diverge in their details and converge in their substance, was a man performing at a level significantly below what he was actually capable of, not failing, not making technical errors, performing correctly, competently, safely, and doing so, in Bruce Lee's assessment, by keeping something in reserve, by not going to the full edge of what his body and training could actually produce, by doing, in other words, exactly what the role required, and nothing more. Now, I want to stop here and tell you what my first reaction to this was, because I think it matters. My first reaction was, so what? The man was doing his job. He was hitting his marks, executing the choreography, delivering what the production needed. The idea that someone could be criticized, that someone could find this insufficient, for performing correctly, but without pushing to the absolute boundary of their physical capacity on a stunt sequence, seemed, on first encounter, more like the exacting standard of a perfectionist than like something worth examining carefully. I held that reading for about a week, and then I understood what Bruce Lee had actually seen, and my reading changed completely. The morning shooting broke at 11:15 for a scheduled pause. Crew moved to reset for the next sequence. In the gap 10, maybe 15 minutes, Bruce Lee crossed the floor to where Lam Chun-wai was drinking water near the equipment cases along the stage wall. There was no one else within easy hearing distance. What passed between them was a conversation of, by the estimates of people who observed it from a distance, about 5 minutes, possibly less. Lam Chun-wai picked up his bag an hour later and left the building. Here is what I want to be honest with you about. I cannot tell you exactly what Bruce Lee said in those 5 minutes. The accounts I found give me the shape of it, and 2 specific fragments that appear consistently enough across separate sources that I trust them as substantially accurate. But I am not going to present this as a verbatim record, because it isn't one. The shape of the conversation, as I understand it from what I found, was this. Bruce Lee told Lam that he had been watching him. He said it not as a warning, but as an opening, the way you begin a conversation with someone when you want them to understand that what follows is based on actual observation, not assumption. He said that what he had seen was someone who knew how to protect himself inside the work, who had learned over 4 years of stunt work in an industry that did not protect its performers and required them to develop their own systems of self-protection, how to operate inside a required performance while keeping the real capacity slightly in reserve, how to be good enough without being everything, he said, and this is one of the 2 fragments that appears across multiple accounts, that he understood why a man learned to do that the industry they were both working in had good reasons embedded in it for learning exactly that the specific kind of courage it took to keep showing up for dangerous work that didn't pay enough and didn't acknowledge the cost was real courage, and he was not dismissing it. And then he said, "But I cannot use it. Not in this film, not in what I am trying to make here." The second fragment, which I found in 2 separate accounts and which I have thought about more than anything else in this research, he said that the key to anything worth doing was living it completely, which meant that the part of yourself you kept in reserve was the part that never got to be real. And that for what he needed, for the specific thing he was trying to build in this film, he needed people who were willing to be completely real inside the work, not reckless, not unsafe, but without the reserve, without the protection. Lam Chun-wai listened to all of this. Then he asked a question. I found the question in 1 account only, which means I hold it more loosely than the rest, but it fits the conversation so precisely that I believe it happened. He asked, "What does a man do when being completely real inside the work is what gets him hurt?" This is where I want to ask you something directly, because when I read that question the first time, I felt it land in a way I wasn't expecting, and I still haven't fully worked out why. What Lam Chun-wai was describing, the strategic reservation, the performance that delivers what is required while protecting something essential, is not a small thing. It is the specific adaptation that people develop when they work in systems that will use what they have and not acknowledge the cost. It is how you survive. And Bruce Lee was standing in front of him and telling him, with genuine respect and zero ambiguity, that survival was not what this film needed from him. I'd like to know what you make of that exchange, not the whole story, that specific moment. Leave it in the comments. I read them, and this is the part of the research I am least settled about, and other people's readings of it have genuinely shifted how I understood things before. Bruce Lee did not try to persuade Lam to stay. This is consistent across every account. He did not argue, did not offer incentives, did not present the conversation as a negotiation. He had said what he saw and what he needed, and he let Lam decide what to do with it. The respect in that, and it was respect, I believe that completely, was the respect of taking someone seriously enough to give them the real assessment rather than the manageable one. Lam left. He went on to work on other Hong Kong productions through the mid-1970s. He was, by the accounts I found, a reliable and capable stunt performer for the remainder of his active career. I was not able to find any record of him speaking about the conversation with Bruce Lee, or about his one day on the Enter the Dragon set, at any point in the years that followed. The Enter the Dragon production records confirm that a stunt performer was released from contract on January 23, 1973. The records do not give a reason. Now, here is what I need you to understand about this story, and about the specific moment in Bruce Lee's life when it took place. The Kung Fu television series had been on American television for the better part of a year by January 1973. David Carradine playing a Chinese-American martial artist, a role that Bruce Lee had been involved in developing, a role that had been given to a white actor because the network had decided in its actual professional judgment that an Asian man could not carry an American television series. This was not an abstract institutional position. It was a specific decision made by specific people, and Bruce Lee had understood exactly what it meant. He had spent years watching an industry tell him that what he was, the specific complete thing he was not commercially viable, that the safe version of him, the managed version, the version that stayed within what the system was comfortable with, was what they could use. Everything beyond that needed to stay in reserve. He had refused. He had gone to Hong Kong and made films that were built on the premise that the reserve was exactly what the audience needed to see, that the thing the industry wanted him to protect was the thing that made the work real. And the Enter the Dragon shoot, January through March 1973, the first Hollywood-Hong Kong co-production, Warner Bros. Money, the proof that he had been right about all of it, was the fullest expression of that refusal. He was not looking for stunt performers who could do the job. He was looking for people who understood that the reserve was the job. What he had seen in Lam Chun-wai on the morning of January 23rd was a man who had learned, for entirely understandable reasons, to operate the way the industry had taught him to operate, by keeping something back, by surviving, and what Bruce Lee could not put in this film was survival. This film was not about surviving. It was about the thing you made when you stopped surviving and started building something out of everything you actually had. Lam Chun-wai walked out of Golden Harvest Studios at 6:41 in the morning and the production moved on. The stunt coordinator filled the gap within a day, possibly two. The sequences were completed. The film was finished in March, released in August. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. 6 weeks before the American release. He never saw the audience receive the proof he had been constructing for 15 years. The stunt performer who left after one day is not in the final film. He is not in the credits. He is not in the documentation that anyone outside a very small number of people on that production ever saw. He is a margin note in an account written by a set decorator who had been at Golden Harvest since the early years and who thought, for whatever reason, that it was worth noting. I think it was worth noting, because what happened in that 10-minute pause on a soundstage in Kowloon between a man who had learned to protect himself inside the work and a man who had spent 15 years refusing to, is the story of the film, not a footnote to it. The actual story of what Bruce Lee was doing and what it cost and what it required from everyone around him. He needed people who were willing to be completely real. He had always been willing to be completely real. The question Lam Chun-wai asked, what does a man do when being completely real inside the work is what gets him hurt, was the right question. The most honest question anyone asked on that production, maybe. And Bruce Lee did not answer it, by the accounts I found. He had already answered it, by the way he had lived and worked for 32 years. The answer was in the film. The answer was in everything he had built since the industry told him to keep something in reserve. The answer was, you do it anyway, and then you find out what you actually are.